Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Nick, chiropractor in Oakbank. Also working in an office down south in Woodcroft, but currently I'm live in Oakbank at that office there. And today's video is our last of 4 parts on a series of concussion. And this one here is called Breaking News, 3.8 times increased risk of ACL tear post-concussion. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is this. I'm going to review a bunch of published research articles to convince you of that link between after you've had a concussion, your brain has healed up from the concussion, and for quite an extended period of time, after you're back playing sport, you're at a much higher risk of getting not only ACL injuries, but all sorts of lower limb injuries, which I'll delve into a bit later on. So it's not just one research paper that's talked about it. There's a number. I'll go over 6 of them for you, just the highlights of them. Now, we'll talk about that link between concussion and other injuries in the legs. Then I'm going to talk about what do we do with that information. Okay, so we know that there's a link. So what? Why is there a link? Possibly try and figure that is, because we can figure out why, then we can perhaps figure out how we can reduce that risk. So that's what we're going to talk about. Now, last week, if you missed out, go back and to our Facebook feed and have a look and see what that video was. It was what you need to know to decrease your risk of concussion. And obviously this one here will be more about what we can hopefully do to help decrease the risk of other injuries as a result of that concussion. But that one was a good one with some just tidbits and good hot tips to decrease that risk of getting concussions in the first place. Now, let's delve into some of those research papers. So I'm just going to I might come in and out of the screen here while I put some papers down. So I'll bring this chair over. There we go. All right. So first one, this article titled Concussion Frequency Associates with Musculoskeletal Injury in Retired NFL Players. So what they did is they looked at a whole pile of NFL players who've retired, asked them how many concussions they've had, and depending on how many concussions they've had, how many lower limb injuries they've also had, or musculoskeletal injuries in particular. So this is the highlight that they found. Okay, so for an NFL player who had 1 concussion in their season, they were at 63% increased risk of having other injuries in their bodies during the rest of that career. Those who had 2 concussions were 126 times increased risk of having other musculoskeletal injuries, and those who had 3 or more concussions had up to 165 times increased risk of having other musculoskeletal injuries compared to those who hadn't had concussions. So definitely a conclusion statement in that article is, as I read it off to you, a higher number of concussions is linked with higher odds of reporting a musculoskeletal injury. So that was published in 2015 in the American College of Sports Medicine journal. Now I'll move on to another one. This one here, published in 2016, American Journal of Sports Medicine. And this one's titled Concussion Increases Odds of Sustaining a Lower Extremity Musculoskeletal Injury After Returning to Play Among Collegiate Athletes. So the next few articles are looking at college athletes in the US. This one is looking at a variety of sports. So we're looking at football in the US, so gridiron, American football, soccer, hockey, most likely ice hockey in Canada or in the US and Canada, softball, basketball, wrestling, or volleyball. And so what they did is they looked at players for 90 days after they've had a concussion and compared them to people who never had a concussion and see what their risk of injuries were like as well. And so they found in this study that people for the next 90 days were 2.5 times at a higher risk for those 90 days. Now I'm going to show you some other studies that show some different stats, but this one here says 2.5 times. And the study results, as I'm reading part of the conclusion, The study results suggest further investigation of neurocognitive and motor control deficits may be warranted beyond the acute injury phase to decrease risk for subsequent injury. So that gives us a few tips or clues as to why these authors think there's an increased risk of lower limb injuries after concussion, as they think even though the brain has healed up, they think there's still some coordination problems that still haven't gone back to normal yet, balance and coordination. So we'll get back into that topic later on. Now, third article, this one here, I'm just trying to see with the date that it was published, 2016, in the Journal of Athletic Training, and it is called Association Between Concussion and Lower Extremity Injuries in Collegiate Athletes. And what they did in this one is they followed athletes throughout their entire career while they're at college, playing a variety of sports, very similar to what I talked to you about in the other one. So from football to hockey to soccer, all those sports. And what they found was up to a 3 times increased risk of lower limb injuries for those who, after they've had a concussion throughout their college career. Now, this is our 4th study now. Hopefully you're starting to realize there's a lot of people finding very similar results. This one, published in the Sports Medicine Journal in 2017, not too long ago. It's called Concussion May Increase the Risk of Subsequent Lower Extremity Musculoskeletal Injury in Collegiate Athletes. Same group of people. What this one found is that for the next 90 days after an athlete has gone back to playing sport, they've been deemed to be recovered as far as the brain is concerned from the concussion. They're at a 3.4 times increased risk. And this is increased risk of ACL tear. If you get an ACL tear, you're done for the season. So, and I mean, these guys in the US, college sports massive. So you oftentimes, that's a stepping stone to going to playing pro, whether it be pro football or pro soccer or whatever the next step is. So, I mean, if you're out of the season at the wrong time, you know, when you got scouts are out there and next year's your big year to maybe make it into the draft and be drafted into playing the pros, that means your chance is done. You don't even have an opportunity. Your potential career as a professional sport athlete is finished. So they found the next 90 days, your brain's healed up from concussion, you're back playing sport, 3.4 times increased risk, ACL tear, and other lower limb injuries such as Achilles strain, calf strain, spraining your ankle, general knee sprains, hamstring, quads, or you Aussies call them drivers, hip flexors, all of those at that same amount of increased risk. I'll just see if there was anything else in that article I want to share with you. Yeah, good. So the risk is high in both males and females, and currently unknown as to how long the elevated risk is for after the concussion as well. They just looked at it for 90 days. Now, this other study, 3.8 times the risk, which is what I put in the headline, 3.8 times at higher risk of ACL tear, potentially all lower other limb strains as well, such as what I mentioned before, ankle, knee sprains, and calf strain, hamstring strain, hip flexor strains, groin strain. 3.8 times increased risk of having all of those things for 90 days after your brain has healed up from concussion and you're back playing your sport again. That is a massive amount. That's a high risk. And again, this study here, they're looking at both men and women's football, basketball, soccer, lacrosse, quite a number of, a big range of sports and athletes. And again, this was college athletes. So this one was called Concussion Increases the Risk of lower extremity musculoskeletal injuries in collegiate athletes. And so this one, that was in 2013. So one of the earlier ones, and this was published in Clinical Journal of Sports Medicine. And this was a big topic at something called American Medical Society for Sports Medicine 22nd annual meeting in San Diego. So we've known about it for a little while, but it's most of the recent research papers are 2015 and on, so getting more and more stuff and interest in this. Now this one has looked at people for an entire year, and what they found is, and this is again in college athletes, 2015 article in American College of Sports Medicine, and what they found is they had a 2 times increased risk of ACL tear, strains of all those different muscles I mentioned to you before, again, for an entire year after they're back to sport and their brain is healed up from that concussion. One last study, the 6th or 7th, I've lost count now, and there might be others out there, but that's just what I grabbed that was of interest to me off the top of as I was doing some searches on PubMed. So this one, Journal of Athletic Training, 2017, lower extremity musculoskeletal injury risk after concussion recovery in high school athletes. So as I mentioned, after concussion recovery, all of these are people who've recovered from their concussion, back into sport, and they're at a higher risk of sustaining these lower limb injuries. This one is high school athletes instead of college athletes. They looked at 196 high schools across 26 states in the USA. Huge population of people. And this is what they found, as I read to you. The results of this first investigation of the musculoskeletal injury risk after concussion in high school athletes were similar to those from a larger body of literature studying the same outcomes in college and professional athletes. They basically found out that in high school athletes, post-concussion, getting back to sport, they're having the same results as the college and the football professional athletes, where the research has been published as well. All right. So, as I mentioned, when I came across this stuff, I gotta tell you, I was quite surprised. I had no idea that there was such a link, one, even existed, and 2, how significant the increased risk was, and 3, it's not just a once-off study. There's a lot of people who've come up with the exact same conclusion. There's something to this. Now, what do we do with this information? So first thing we do is try and figure out, why is there an increased risk? At this stage, we don't know for sure 100% why there's an increased risk. But one of the possibilities is this, which makes sense to me given some of the other talks I've talked to you in this series on concussion, is when you get a concussion, to refresh your memory, there is a big blow to the head and up to over 90 G's of force going to your head, and that will cause an injury to your neck, because from other research we know that your neck in a car whiplash injury only needs 4.5 G's of force to your neck to cause a neck injury, is comparison to 90 G's of force to cause concussion. So there's the neck injury. What does a neck injury have to do with lower leg problems? Well, we do know from whiplash studies and neck injury studies that when your neck gets affected, it influences your balance and coordination. If your balance and coordination are off, then that means it significantly increases your risk of all sorts of other injuries, including your lower limbs. And you got to realize the thing that controls your entire body sits at the top, which is the brain. And the proprioceptive information, proprioceptive meaning your brain's awareness of where your legs are in place, where your whole body is in space, that information, for it to be clear in your brain, needs to have no interference along this pathway, along the nerves, traveling, up and down your spinal cord to your limbs, up to your brain. And there's some interesting research that's been done by Heidi Havik out of New Zealand that has shown that joints in the neck that aren't moving as they should will disrupt your brain's ability to perceive where your limbs are in space. So where your brain thinks your arm or your leg is in space, it's a slight mismatch of where it thinks it is and where it actually is. And that slight mismatch, playing sport in a high-speed game where there's all sorts of people running around you, there's a ball or flying around, or a puck on the ice rink flying around, your read and reaction time and your balance, they all need to be 100%. And if they're not, your risk of injury goes up, technically up to 3.8 times up. So that's how some of the possibilities as to why that increased risk, possibly because of the neck injury affecting your balance and coordination. It also, post-concussion, may have eye gaze control issues. So this is another area of research where your brain's ability to control your eyes and focus on things can be disrupted, and that potentially could have an impact from the neck as well. But that coordination can therefore increase your risk of just focusing in on tracking the ball as it's flying, tracking where people are, where you are, and so that mismatch again increases your risk of these types of injuries into your lower limbs. Those are the two biggest reasons why I think, and some of the authors, as I alluded to earlier, think there's a balance and reaction time issue going on. So how can we decrease that risk? Well, in my opinion, I would say get a chiropractic assessment, because we want to assess for your balance and reaction time, your body's ability to have good balance and reaction time. And if it's poor, then we should be checking out your neck for the reasons that I've mentioned before. Now, ideally, I'd highly recommend you see a chiropractor that is knowledgeable on the topic of concussions, because you want them to be aware about all sorts of things. If you're on top of the research with regard to concussion, and people who've had neck injuries, if you do too much too soon to somebody who's had a concussion, it can be overstimulating, and it can honestly even bring on some of the symptoms of their concussion. So we want to work to the capacity and the ability of that patient to improve their results and improve their function without and minimizing sort of relapses of those concussions as much as possible. So assessing your neck by a knowledgeable chiropractor in regard to concussion is definitely something I'd recommend to help decrease the risk of these lower limb injuries. At this stage, there's no research to show that if you do have chiropractic after you've had a concussion, that risk will be taken away. But there is research to show that chiropractic has decreased the risk of lower limb injuries in VFL football players out of Victorian Football League by up to 4 times, which is pretty similar to the risk that's increased because of concussion. So I think it's an interesting ratio or connection there. And the other thing is, for some people, they may also need to do some rehab from the perspective of possibly visual rehab to retrain their brain and their eyes to be able to focus and gaze on things. They may need to do some functional reaction time training rehab. So in the gym or out in the field with some people where their body is forced to be under just going through drills, and at the same time having their brain react to commands, or react to something going on. So let's say you're doing 5 burpees and somebody hits you a ball for a pass out to the right, out to the left, overhead, but just quick, unpredictable positions to retrain the brain to react quickly, and just getting that body and brain connected again. So first step is obviously making sure that there's no interference in that connection or communication between the brain and the body. That's where the chiropractic comes in. And then the second one has to do with retraining, rewiring that connection by practicing, by training it. So that is it with regard to concussion, our conclusion to the whole series. Now, if you are part of a sports club, or you think that this would be valuable information for your team, then pass this on to them. Let them know too that I'd be more than happy to come out to your clubs and do a bit more specific talk on the topic of concussion and how we can help decrease the risk of these injuries post-concussion, how we can help decrease the risk of concussions altogether, just some different tactics, strategies that can be implemented. And if you're interested in that, let us know, give the office a call, and I'd be happy to chat with you guys. Next series over the next month of May will be on the topic of chronic back pain. So if you've been suffering from any chronic back pain or know anybody that's been suffering chronic back pain, tune in over the next month. I'll be doing it once a week. It may not always be Thursdays at lunch. I'll do my best for it to be then, but if not, I might be sporadically in there. But you can always tune back in at a later time and watch them as well. Take care, guys.